I'm Michael Shuttleworth and I live in Hathersage. 70 years ago, I was at school when we heard of the death of King George VI. And I remember exactly where I was, standing in the boot room at my little school in Surrey, and we were all absolutely knocked out by the news. We knew the king was ill, but when the death actually occurred, and suddenly we realized that an institution which we'd grown to be completely used to was in change, and we were going to get a new king or queen, we were quite shocked. As time went on, and of course there was over a year between the death of the king and the coronation of the new queen, we began to anticipate and look forward to this amazing parade and celebration which surrounded our new and beautiful young queen. In June 1953, having anticipated this extraordinary event, I persuaded my parents to let me have the day off from school. After much persuasion, I was taken out and we caught the train up to London, which was in a turmoil of preparation for the coronation. We found our way to Piccadilly, having walked across Green Park, and I think having walked most of the way from Waterloo. And we took up our positions. We were standing opposite the In and Out on Piccadilly. I was quite small, being 11 years old. I managed to push myself to the front of the queue. When the parade started, and this was after the coronation itself, it left Westminster Abbey, and we got an absolute ringside view of our new queen and her consort in the state coach. I think the second most impressive thing in my memory on that day was the unrelenting rain. It was miserable. The troops marched past, and those that had blanco, which was how they whitened their belts in those days, their belts were dripping down, and particularly those wearing red was staining those tunics. But nobody seemed to mind. And of course, in amongst this terrific parade were the ruling heads of state from the Commonwealth countries. And I think there were something like 70 of them. But the one that stuck in the memory was that of the Queen of Tonga, Queen Saloti. She got enormous publicity, but we saw her, and she was there in an open-top coach, not wearing any extra clothing, and certainly not any waterproof clothing, just sitting there. She was quite a large lady, beaming with happiness. And I do remember that. The parade seemed to go on forever, and it passed down through and round Hyde Park Corner, through the arch with the quadriga on top, and then processed up Park Lane, along Oxford Street, down Regent Street, and back down the Mall to the Palace. What I really remember about the day is the sheer excitement and good-naturedness of everybody. There was a huge sense of optimism and pleasure and admiration for this beautiful young girl who'd shouldered such enormous responsibility. We hadn't at this time any idea of what had gone on in the Abbey, but it must have been the most impressive event and an enormous strain on our new young queen. However, when she went past us in the coach in Piccadilly, we were just entranced by all this. It was about as much as we could see for the whole day, because there were so many people. We did return across Green Park to try and take up a position outside Buckingham Palace, but the crowds were so huge we just couldn't make any headway. So we had to make do, at least with having a ringside seat in Piccadilly. And that's something that's stayed with me forever. I spent my early years in Portsmouth, my father being in the Navy, and it was a wonderful place to be. I had a small dinghy which I had the use of and used to spend an awful lot of time sailing around Portsmouth Harbour looking at the ships that were based there. On one occasion, I remember 2 Russian cruisers, the Ordzhonikidze was one of them, that brought Bulganin and Khrushchev to Portsmouth shortly after the coronation. 1953 was a very interesting year for young people like me. First of all, the coronation, and then A month later, the Coronation review of the fleet. This had been a custom going back for many accessions of new monarchs for the king or queen to review the fleet at anchor and usually at Spithead, which is the stretch of water between the western end of the Isle of Wight and Southampton Water. On this occasion, in July 1953, 243 ships were anchored in lines taking up the whole of that length of water. It was really an astonishing sight. The head of the fleet, although she was in reserve, was HMS Vanguard, the last battleship built for the Royal Navy, completed just after the end of the war, so she never fired her 16-inch guns in anger. She was used to take the King, that is King George VI, and Queen Elizabeth to South Africa, and that's about as far as she ever went. But the Navy in those days was quite different from the Navy now, which has shrunk to something like 19 first-rate ships. It's an astonishing comparison of what the Navy was and what the Navy is now. Although, of course, the destructive power of the munitions that are available to the Navy are much greater than they were in those days. But that day, which unfortunately, because I'd been let out of school for the Coronation the month before, and my father was serving in HMS Dido, a cruiser, which was in the review line, and of course they couldn't take guests on board, so I was left at school, much to my annoyance, even rage. So I had to watch it on television. But it was the most astonishing sight to see all these ships anchored in the Solent. There were some 22 ships that came from the Commonwealth countries, including the beautiful Amerigo Vespucci, which in fact was an Italian ship, an Italian training ship, and a square rigger. So that day passed, and there was gun salutes and all the crews removing their headdress and cheering the Queen as she went past in the temporary royal yacht, which was for that day HMS Surprise, culminating in the evening as it got dark with the entire fleet being illuminated. I was going to say lit up, but that caused a huge joke at the previous coronation in 1937 when the commentator, who'd been having a pretty good party, announced at the crucial moment when the lights went on, she said, "Oh, the fleet's lit up!" And this caused enormous amusement. That day, I regret deeply missing being there in person, but it was just the most impressive sight, and I don't think we'll see the like again.